Senator from Oregon.
I'm speaking in morning business with my colleague and friend, Senator Merkley, to talk about forestry policy and to give the Senate a little bit of an update on where we are, because we have so many resource-dependent communities that just have been devastated as a result of a variety of policies. And I want to touch briefly and then yield to Senator Merkley on what some of those elements are. The first is our softwood lumber producers are now in a titanic battle with the Canadians, fighting the Canadian system of heavily subsidizing their industry, thereby cutting ours. And a group of 25 senators, a quarter of the Senate, Mr. President, have joined me in an effort so that our trade representative pushes back and continues to fight this unjust, inequitable system until we no longer see Oregon and American jobs destroyed as a result of the Canadians unfairly subsidizing their industry. That's number one. Number two, we feel very strongly about getting the harvest up in a sustainable fashion. We know that there's an awful lot of work to do in the woods. We can do it with an environmental ethic, with an ethic of forest health, and I strongly support that. I've introduced legislation to do that in my home state and have been supportive of colleagues' efforts to do it in their parts of the country. But the reality is, and the Forest Service has said this, you would have to increase logging on our public lands by 400% in order to no longer need a third leg of the forestry stool, which is the Secure Rural Schools program. So I want it understood, we're going to push back against inequitable trade practices that are hurting jobs in rural Oregon and rural America. We are going to support increasing the harvest in a sustainable fashion, but there is no realistic increase that might possibly win a passage here in Washington and be upheld legally that involves taking the harvest up to 400%. So you are going to need a safety net. And Senator Merkley and I, Senator Crapo, Senator Risch, many colleagues on both sides of the aisle have fought to get this program, which is now expired, extended for one more year. Now, this program began in 2000 as a result of a bipartisan piece of legislation that Senator Craig and I authored called the Secure Rural Schools Bill. It now benefits more than 700 communities, and we see that all over the country, this program is dependent on for education, it's dependent on for roads, it's dependent on in many areas for law enforcement. Unfortunately, our colleagues have not been willing to extend it. Senator Merkley and I and Senator Crapo and Senator Risch, in a bipartisan way, have wanted to work here in the Senate in a bipartisan way to get this extended, but to put these vital county payments on the back burner, I think would be an enormous mistake. So I want to yield the remainder of our time to my friend and colleague, but there are really three legs to the stool. Fight unfair trade practices, get the harvest up in a sustainable kind of fashion, and understand that you're not going to be able to meet the needs of hard-hit rural communities without the safety net program, the Secure Rural Schools program. Senator Crapo, Senator Risch, Senator Merkley, and I are going to keep coming back here again and again until we get it reauthorized, and I yield the remainder of our time to Senator Merkley.
Mr. President, I really appreciate the comments of my colleague from Oregon, who back in the year 2000 fought so hard to right a wrong. The wrong was that a variety of measures related to these timbered acres reduced the ability to pull as much harvest off as in the past. Part of that was the fact that there was simply a lot of second growth that wasn't ready to cut yet. Another was a variety of rules related to environmental protections, to forest fire prevention, a whole series of things. But the bottom line is that these counties, which originally had these lands before they transferred them to the federal government for safekeeping, that they are dependent upon revenue from the timber sales on these lands. And those timber sales, as my colleague pointed out, simply can't operate at the same level to provide the resources those counties operated on. So much as with payment in lieu of taxes or the PILT program, we stepped in, my colleague stepped in and led the effort to honor the promise made to those counties. And we have been doing so now for 16 years. One of the challenges that has really emerged is that we only reauthorize it for a short period of time. We say, well, yeah, we'll still honor the promise, but only for a year or only for 2 years, which means the counties never know what's going to be coming. They're really caught in limbo. And because they are rural counties, they don't have a great amount of manufacturing. A lot of these counties don't have a lot of farmland. They're really dependent upon the forest industry as the heart of their economy. So this is very important to them. And we need to honor the promise to these counties just as we have through the PILT program. Now, it is certainly a situation that we can debate at what level that should be, but it needs to be long-term and a long-term commitment to this promise to these counties. Remember, these were county lands that were transferred back to the federal government to essentially hold in trust for them. So I share with my colleague the desire that we address this. We address it in a fashion that provides a strong foundation, a strong commitment to the promise made to rural America, to rural forested counties. And as mentioned, 720 counties in 41 states. That's a pretty a significant deal across the country. We need to act, and we need to act now. And I turn this back over to my colleague.
President, I'm going to wrap this up simply by way of saying that a program like this has really generated a tremendous amount of community involvement. There are advisory committees that bring the industry and the environmental folks together. That's what we're going to have, Mr. President, to get this job right. It's called collaborative forestry. And the Secure Rural Schools program that Senator Merkley and I want to reauthorize is a textbook case of what you want to do for collaborative forestry. So I come back as we wrap up. For people who are watching the way forest policy is being approached here, and we didn't even really get into forest health because we all know our forests, a lot of them, particularly in the West, are just burning up. So Senator Risch and Senator Crapo and the two of us want to end something called fire borrowing, which is an extraordinarily inefficient policy that discourages prevention with respect to fire. So we're going to be back to talk about the nuts and bolts of sensible forest policy. But if we build on this collaborative ethic, as we have sought to do in our ONC bill, the bill that Senator Merkley and I have been involved, our bill, according to the experts, doubles the harvest on average for each of the next 50 years. So we want it understood that we're going to be fighting on a number of fronts. We're going to fight with respect to trade policy, which is long overdue as it relates to getting a fair shake for our softwood lumber producers, value-added forestry. We're going to focus on collaborative approaches, get the harvest up in a sustainable way. Senator Merkley has talked about the promise of secure rural schools, and I feel that it's very regrettable that when Senator Crapo and Senator Risch tried to convince the other side of the aisle to accept secure rural schools now, we couldn't get it done. But I think all who know us know that A, we're persistent, and B, we know you don't get anything done that's important without bipartisan support. So that's the way we'll be approaching forestry policy in the days ahead. Mr. President, I yield back.